All right, I'm just going to pick up right where we left up on the last. We talked about, on the last video, I talked about the small intestines, the large intestines, and I mentioned kind of these accessory organs, but I like this diagram kind of shows that. So organs that, again, accessory organisms when we talk about digestion are organisms that don't directly come into contact with food, but they're really important because maybe they make some, enzymes or other things that are important, molecules that might be important in digestion. And so organs that add secretions or enzymes. So, and I already mentioned specifically the liver makes that bile. Gallbladder is also important in bile. It actually concentrates the bile. And we said in the last video, I said this is really important for lipid or those fats and oils the digestion of those. The pancreas is also an accessory organ. This is where insulin is produced. And remember, if you had me last semester for Gen Bio, we did talk a little bit about this, but that pancreas and producing that insulin, and this is the one that, people who are diabetics have a problem with insulin production that happen. And there's other types of diseases that are affected that the pancreas can cause, right? But anyway, so that insulin molecule that's produced is so important because it's a carrier molecule. It's the way that glucose gets into your cells. And without insulin, you can eat all the food in the world, but that we have to have a certain amount of glucose that gets into our cells. And if it can't get in there, it's just floating around in that extracellular matrix. And it can't be used for like cellular respiration is a really important process where ATP is made. Remember that? And glucose is important to that. We can't get the glucose into the cells without that insulin. So diabetics actually have to take insulin and inject insulin into their bloodstream in order to facilitate that movement of glucose into cells. Salivary glands is another, it's a gland, so food doesn't directly go, obviously, into your salivary glands, but super important that amylase, that enzyme that's produced in those, really important for breaking down starches. So these accessory organs, incredibly important. We can't survive without them. Gallbladder you actually can because the liver is actually where the bile is produced, but the gallbladder is kind of important in just concentrating it, which makes it more effective. But they share a common bile duct that then empties that bile into the small intestine. Some other interesting functions of the pancreas are, so other than that insulin, there's also other enzymes that are produced in the pancreas. I actually had a student, and I don't remember what the disorder was, but he had something wrong with his pancreas. It wasn't the insulin production, it was something else. And he had to be really careful what he ate because he didn't have the right amount of these enzymes. And it was really a problem. Like there were certain foods, just different foods that I remember he just could never eat. And even when we mentioned things like bicarbonate, it contains bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is like baking soda, okay? It's exactly the same thing as baking soda. So it neutralizes acid in that chyme or in, remember that stuff that's produced in the stomach? So it helps to neutralize some of that. Your stomach's really acidic, but we don't want acid going everywhere in your body because it doesn't all have that mucus to protect it. So it has to be neutralized. And so the pancreas, imagine if the pancreas wasn't producing enough of this bicarbonate, what a problem that might be for really the small intestines and the rest of the digestive system. The liver, I know we mentioned the production of bile, but it's also important in detoxification of the blood. This is partly why people who drink excessive amounts of alcohol for long periods of time can die of liver failure because your liver just gets, it's too much, right? Like it can't remove all of it, and it works so hard to do that in the process, and it absorbs all that stuff, and obviously bad for your liver after a while, for years and years of that. There's also some glycogen storage, glucose that gets converted to glycogen for storage. Some of that happens in the liver as well. And then gallbladder aids the liver just by storing and concentrating those bile salts. So it just makes it extra efficient at absorbing or breaking down what bile does, which is those lipids and fats, right? All right, so I'm going to skip all of this stuff because I have to choose, and I choose that that's one that you can pick that up somewhere else. That's talking all about carbohydrates and lipids and all that kind of stuff in the body and how important it is to eat a balanced diet. Hopefully you've covered that in other classes, and you can read it in your book if it interests you. I do want to say proteins are really important because we're made of mostly proteins. Proteins are made from these 20 different amino acids. We as animals have to consume all 20 of these amino acids. So people who are vegetarians need to be extra vigilant about making sure that they are, in fact, consuming all of those different amino acids so that you can build complete proteins in your body, right? So I think proteins are always worth mentioning. I feel like it seems to be oftentimes more of kind of a girl thing. Like when you girls go off to college, sometimes some of you may think you can survive on just, I don't know, bread and noodles, ramen noodles, whatever. I shouldn't just say girls, but this is just my experience. You need to eat the right things always. You can end up with anemia, and you can end up having some serious health issues if you're not consuming enough protein. So something to always watch out for. Like I'm always dieting, so I'm always watching what I eat, but I like protein. So I do pretty well with making sure that my body gets protein. Okay, so that digestive process, this was kind of mentioned, I think, earlier in yesterday's video. So ingestion is just that process of taking in food. Digestion is the breaking down, and elimination is just it leaving your body. And we have several digestive phases. Just a quick overview. The cephalic phase is controlled by neural response, which is the nerve. So there's a stimulus that's provided when you eat food. Your body's like, hey, that would be food, and I know what to do with that. So that's kind of the neural response. Your body responds in a certain way. When you're chewing food, even your body responds by producing saliva, right? The gastric phase is, when we talk about gastric, we're talking about the stomach. So gastric is always like what's happening in the stomach. So the stomach distension, it gets, right? Like, so your stomach can expand. In the gastric phase, it decreases the pH of the gastric contents. This gastric phase is stimulated by your stomach is like, hey, there's some undigested food here. I know what to do, right? And that digestive process continues in that gastric phase. And then the intestinal phase. So remember, this is all about, so that chyme, that sort of cookie dough substance stuff that food is broken down to in the stomach, now passes through the sphincter that leads into the small intestine, the pyloric sphincter, and the sphincter controls how quickly that actually can pass through there, and stuff passes into that small intestine. This triggers, lots of body responses, both hormonal and neural, meaning that nerves are stimulated, and this coordinates the activities of the intestinal tract. And those accessory organs, the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder. And I think it's important to recognize that none of our systems work alone and by themselves. Everybody's part of a club and everybody's part of a larger system. Your digestive system is influenced obviously by a lot of things, and your endocrine system, which is your glands, are actually an important part of that too. So the endocrine system works with the digestive system by controlling the response of glands in the body, releasing certain hormones at the right times, like your body knows. The first salivation is actually a hormonal response. So your body, there's a hormone that says, hey, there's food in the mouth, there's some stuff that needs to be broken down, and that production of saliva with that amylase enzyme begins. And then I wanted to go back and just note that, because you see this a lot, the small intestine is really long. We mentioned like 18 feet or so. So we do break it down into beginning, middle, and end. The beginning is the duodenum. So this is your stomach. This is the very beginning of that small intestine, where that food will move through the sphincter into the duodenum. And then the second part is the jejunum, the middle part of that small intestine. And then near the end, we call that closer to the end, right before it goes into the large intestine. We actually call that the ileum. Sometimes people have, I don't know if they have issues like Crohn's disease is one that affects the intestine. Sometimes they have to have parts of it removed, and they may have to wear a bag, which we call that sometimes it's an ileostomy bag, meaning that it's connected to the small intestines at that point. And waste is eliminated from the body through this bag. So that's, one thing that, one type of surgery that we can do, or one type of process that we can do with the ileum. And I think, honestly, this is all of the really important stuff that we're going to do. So literally, this is all you need to know for the digestive system, and we will move on. Good luck.